I am Sienna, 34 years old, and the founder of a highly successful financial technology firm in Atlanta. To the corporate world, I am a ruthless data analyst who builds software that tracks digital footprints and market trends. But to my family, I am just the invisible scapegoat, the dark-skinned, natural-haired daughter who refused to play their exhausting games of social climbing and superficial status. Before I continue this story about how I single-handedly dismantled my toxic family's greatest deception, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if you have ever faced relatives who severely underestimated your worth, only to watch them choke on their own arrogance. Growing up, my mother Vivian ruled our household with an iron fist and a wardrobe of designer church hats. She had a very specific vision of Black excellence, and it was entirely embodied by my older sister Keisha. Keisha was the golden child, the Spelman College pageant queen, who married a flashy, smooth-talking white real estate agent named Brad. Brad loved to play the affluent savior, constantly bragging about his properties, while secretly drowning in debt. Then there was Darius, my 28-year-old brother, who still lived at home treating my mother's bank account like his personal ATM. I was the one who quietly moved out, built my business from the ground up, and stopped expecting invitations to family dinners. I thought I had completely escaped their toxicity, but blood has a funny way of trying to drag you back into the mud. It was a Tuesday evening, just a week before the holidays. I was sitting in my penthouse office, the city skyline glowing outside my floor-to-ceiling windows, running predictive analytics for a new software launch. My phone buzzed on the glass desk. Then it buzzed again, and again. Within seconds, a rapid-fire cascade of notifications lit up the screen. I picked up the device and frowned. I had been accidentally added to a group chat titled Xmas at Big Mama's. My heart did a strange, uncomfortable flutter at the name. Big Mama was our grandmother, the only person in that family who ever showed me unconditional love. She had scrubbed floors during the segregation era just to buy that beautiful historic house in our neighborhood. She left it behind as a symbol of our roots, a legacy of hard work and endurance. I scrolled up to the very top of the 67 unread messages, my eyes scanning the rapid exchanges between Vivian, Keisha, Brad, and Darius. The conversation was not about holiday menus or gift exchanges. It was a meticulously crafted conspiracy, and I was the target. "Is the VIP buyer definitely coming on Christmas Eve?" Keisha's text read. "Brad said this guy is bringing cash. We cannot afford any screw-ups." "He is flying in from New York," Brad replied. "Just keep the house clean and make sure nobody interrupts the viewing. If we close this deal, my agency gets saved and Vivian gets her cut to pay off those credit cards." "What about Sienna?" Darius chimed in. "You know how crazy she gets about Big Mama's stuff. If she shows up, she is going to ruin everything." My breath caught in my throat. They were selling Big Mama's house, the house that was supposed to stay in the family forever. My mother had taken over the property management after Big Mama passed, claiming she was preserving it for all of us. Instead, she was liquidating our heritage to bail out her golden child's desperate, fraudulent husband. I kept scrolling the betrayal, turning from a sharp sting into a slow, burning rage. "Make sure she doesn't find out," Vivian wrote. "That girl has always been a thorn in my side, constantly trying to outshine her sister and ruin our family's peace. She doesn't need to be there." "Just tell her the wrong date like last year," Darius replied, followed by a laughing emoji. "Tell her we are doing dinner on the 26th. By the time she realizes, Brad will have the contract signed and the cash in hand." "Perfect," Keisha added. "Brad has the power of attorney papers ready. It is going to be the best Christmas ever." I sat perfectly still in my quiet, expansive office. Years ago, reading those words would have shattered me. I would have cried over my mother's cruel dismissal, over my sister's callous manipulation, over the realization that my own flesh and blood viewed me as nothing more than an obstacle to be discarded. But I was no longer the quiet, insecure girl desperate for a seat at Vivian's perfectly set dining table. I was a woman who dealt in data, facts, and leverage. And my family had made one fatal, catastrophic miscalculation. They had absolutely no idea who actually owned that house. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, my fingers moved swiftly across the screen. I carefully screenshotted every single one of the 67 messages, ensuring I had undeniable digital evidence of their premeditated fraud. I saved the images to a secure encrypted cloud server. Then I stared at the text input box. The group chat was still active, bubbling with their excitement about the impending payday. I typed out one single devastating message. "Merry Christmas. Your realtor will explain the rest." I hit send. I did not wait to see the read receipts. I did not wait to see the frantic typing bubbles that inevitably followed. I immediately blocked all their numbers, silenced my personal phone, and tossed it into my leather designer handbag. Let them panic. Let them scramble in the dark, wondering what I knew and what I was going to do about it. The element of surprise was the most powerful weapon I possessed, and I was about to deploy it with surgical precision. The next morning, the winter air was crisp and biting, carrying the distinct chill of an approaching storm. I did not log on for my morning executive briefing. I did not check my corporate emails. I walked down to my private secure garage and approached the sleek midnight black Porsche Panamera, parked in my reserved spot. My family believed I drove a practical 10-year-old sedan, assuming my startup was just another one of my cute little tech hobbies, barely keeping me afloat. They knew absolutely nothing about the reality of my massive financial success. I slid into the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life with a deep, throaty growl. I wore a tailored emerald green trenchcoat, stiletto boots that clicked with authority, and a pair of oversized dark sunglasses. I looked exactly like the woman they had always resented, successful, unbothered, and completely out of their league. The drive to the historic neighborhood took exactly 30 minutes. As I turned onto the familiar tree-lined street where Big Mama's legacy stood, my pulse remained remarkably steady. This was not a nostalgic homecoming. This was a hostile takeover. I pulled up to the curb. Parked right in the driveway was Brad's least ostentatious Mercedes SUV, alongside a sleek black town car that clearly belonged to his VIP investor. They were already inside. The illegal tour was currently underway. I turned off the ignition and gripped the steering wheel, a cold, predatory smile touching the corners of my mouth. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out a heavy brass key, the master key to the front door. They thought they were selling a house. They had no idea they were walking straight into a trap. I opened the car door and stepped out into the freezing wind, ready to burn their entire foundation to the absolute ground. The front door of Big Mama's house was unlocked, a rookie mistake for someone claiming to be a top-tier real estate professional. I pushed the solid wood door open with enough force to make the hinges groan. The sound echoed through the foyer, instantly shattering the polite murmurs coming from the formal living room. I stepped inside, the sharp click of my stiletto boots against the hardwood floors, announcing my arrival like a ticking clock. The scent of cinnamon and pine needles filled the air, a staged attempt to make the property feel festive for their mark. I walked past the staircase and stood in the arched doorway. There was Brad wearing a cheap he probably thought looked bespoke, sweating visibly under his collar. I was enthusiastically gesturing toward the original crown molding, playing the role of the affluent savior preserving local history. Standing next to him, examining the fireplace mantel with a critical eye, was an older gentleman in a tailored cashmere overcoat. Brad stopped mid-sentence as he caught sight of me. The artificial salesman's smile instantly melted off his face, replaced by a deep, ugly scowl. He quickly excused himself from his client and marched across the room, positioning his body as a physical barrier to block my view of the investor. "What the hell are you doing here?" Brad hissed, keeping his voice low so his VIP buyer would not hear the panic vibrating in his throat. "This is a private exclusive showing Sienna. You cannot just barge in here looking for a handout." I slowly took off my sunglasses and slid them into my pocket. "I am not looking for a handout, Brad. I am observing a masterclass in fraud." His face flushed a mottled angry red. He leaned in closer, trying to intimidate me with his height. "Listen to me carefully," Brad growled, pointing a thick finger at my chest. "I do not have time for your dramatic nonsense. I am trying to save this family from financial ruin. Just because you are living paycheck to paycheck, struggling to pay rent in a tiny apartment, does not mean you get to drag us down. We are closing a massive deal today. Do not ruin this because you are desperate for attention. Get out of this house before I call the police. You are more than welcome to call the police, I replied, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly level. In fact, I highly encourage it. Let us see who ends up leaving in the back of a squad car. What is going on out here? A sharp voice called out from the kitchen. Keisha strutted into the living room holding a tray of sparkling water. She wore a tight burgundy cocktail dress that was entirely inappropriate for a midday real estate viewing. When her eyes locked onto mine, she stopped dead in her tracks. The tray trembled in her hands. Sienna, Keisha snapped, setting the tray down. She marched over to stand beside her husband, presenting a united front of utter delusion. Who told you to come here? Mom said we were having Christmas dinner next week. You always have to show up where you are not wanted and ruin everything for everyone else. I show up exactly where I am supposed to be, I answered, crossing my arms over my trench coat. And it seems I arrived just in time to stop you two from committing a federal crime. Keisha let out a harsh, mocking laugh. She looked me up and down, her eyes full of the exact same toxic superiority she had weaponized against me since we were children. A federal crime? You are delusional, Keisha sneered. You have always been jealous of me. It eats you alive, does it not? Ever since I got my degree from Spelman College and you had to settle for a state school. Ever since I secured a wealthy husband while you remain single selling internet products. You cannot stand the fact that I am building a legacy while you have nothing to show for your life. We are securing our financial future right now, and you are just a bitter woman trying to drag me down to your level. Your successful husband. I repeated my words, dripping with calculated sarcasm. The successful husband who currently owes $500,000 to creditors and whose real estate license is hanging by a frayed thread. Brad flinched as if I had physically struck him. The sweat on his forehead gleamed under the living room chandelier. Keisha opened her mouth to scream at me, her manicured hands curling into fists, but a deep voice interrupted her impending tantrum. Is there a problem here, Brad? The elite investor turned away from the fireplace. He adjusted the cuffs of his cashmere coat as he assessed the tense scene unfolding in the center of the room. He took 2 steps forward, his authoritative presence instantly silencing Keisha and Brad. They snapped to attention, their faces morphing back into compliant, desperate smiles. No problem at all, Mr. Sterling, Brad said quickly, his voice cracking with panic. Just an estranged relative causing a minor disturbance. We will have her removed immediately so we can finalize the paperwork. Mr. Sterling did not look at Brad. His sharp eyes bypassed the sweating real estate agent and locked directly onto me. A look of genuine surprise crossed his weathered features, followed by a warm, deeply respectful smile that shifted the power dynamic in the room. He ignored Brad's outstretched hand and walked toward me. Ms. Sienna, Mr. Sterling said, extending his hand to me with professional reverence. What an unexpected pleasure. I had no idea you were connected to this property. My executive board is still raving about the digital infrastructure audit your financial technology firm conducted for our parent company last quarter. Your software practically saved us from a disastrous corporate merger. Brad and Keisha froze, their eyes widening in paralyzing horror. I accepted his hand, giving it a firm shake. The silence in the living room was absolute, heavy with their impending doom. I could practically hear the gears grinding to a halt in Brad's head. Keisha looked as though the air had been violently sucked from her lungs. They had planned for an easy cash grab. They had not planned for their wealthy target to recognize the sister they had spent their entire lives trying to erase. The pleasure is truly mine, Mr. Sterling, I said, keeping my voice smooth. I am glad our audit provided the clarity your board needed. However, you have been brought here under false pretenses today. Mr. Sterling withdrew his hand, his eyebrows pulling together in a sharp frown. He looked from me to the sweating agent, then back at me again. False pretenses? I do not understand, Sienna. Brad assured me this property was an exclusive off-market pocket listing. He said the family was highly motivated to sell quietly before the holidays. I let out a humorless laugh. Highly motivated to sell, perhaps, but this property is not an off-market pocket listing. It is not on the market at all. My brother-in-law is attempting to execute a fraudulent transaction. The color drained from Brad's face. He lunged forward, waving his hands frantically, as if he could physically bat my words out of the air. "Mr. Sterling, please do not listen to a word she is saying," Brad stammered, his voice pitching an octave higher. "She is estranged from the family. She has a history of severe mental health issues. She just wanders into places and causes scenes. I have the legal paperwork right here in my briefcase." Keisha immediately jumped in to salvage the illusion. "Yes, exactly. She is completely delusional. My mother, Vivian, owns this house, and we are fully authorized to close this deal today. Please, Mr. Sterling, let us step into the dining room and finalize the contract." Mr. Sterling did not move. He was a veteran investor who had survived decades of corporate acquisitions. He could spot a lying salesman from a mile away. He looked at Brad's sweating forehead, noted Keisha's trembling hands, and then looked at my perfectly calm posture. He knew exactly who to believe. "Brad," Mr. Sterling said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register, "are you attempting to sell me a property without proper legal authorization?" "No, sir, absolutely not," Brad cried out, practically hyperventilating. "I am a licensed professional. I would never risk my career on a bad deal." "Your career is already over," I interjected. "If you actually pulled a title search, you would know that Vivian has not held the legal rights to this house for a very long time. If Mr. Sterling wires you a single dollar today, you will be committing felony wire fraud across state lines." Mr. Sterling's jaw clenched. He buttoned his cashmere coat with deliberate movements. The polite buyer was gone, replaced by a furious executive who realized he had almost been dragged into a criminal conspiracy. "I do not do business with liars, and I certainly do not do business with criminals," Mr. Sterling said, fixing Brad with a glare of absolute disgust. "I am contacting the State Real Estate Commission the moment I get into my car. You will be lucky if you only lose your license. Do not ever contact my office again." "Wait, please let me explain," Brad begged, taking a pathetic step toward the door. His desperate plea bounced off the walls, completely ignored. He reached out as if to grab the older man's sleeve, but stopped at the last possible second. The magnitude of his failure was finally setting in, crushing his fragile ego. "Have a wonderful Christmas, Ms. Sienna," Mr. Sterling said, giving me a polite nod before turning his back on Brad and walking out. The heavy wood door slammed shut behind him, sealing their fate. For 3 agonizing seconds, the only sound in the house was Brad's heavy breathing. He stared at the closed door, watching a massive cash commission and his professional reputation evaporate into thin air. Then he turned to face me. His sheer panic instantly morphed into explosive, unhinged rage. "You ruin everything!" Brad roared, his face contorting with absolute fury. He charged across the living room, closing the distance between us. He looked as though he was going to physically attack me, his hands balled into tight fists. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood my ground, staring him down with eyes as cold as absolute ice. Keisha shrieked, running forward to grab his arm before he could do something that would land him in a jail cell. "Brad, stop!" Keisha yelled, yanking him back. She turned her venomous glare onto me. "Are you happy now, Sienna? Are you satisfied? You just destroyed our only way out of debt. Mom is going to kill you." She gave Brad the power of attorney to sell this place. "You have no right to interfere with her property." "She signed a legally binding document," Brad yelled over his wife's shoulder, pointing an accusing finger at my face. "I have the paperwork sitting right there on the kitchen island. Vivian holds the deed. She authorized me to liquidate this asset, and you just cost us millions. You are going to pay for this. I am going to sue you for tortious interference." I slowly walked past them, my heels clicking methodically against the floorboards, until I reached the marble island in the center of the kitchen. Brad's leather briefcase was sitting there, overflowing with his fraudulent contracts. I reached into my trench coat pocket and pulled out a thick folded document bearing the official raised gold seal of the county clerk's office. I slapped the certified document down onto the marble countertop with a sharp, resounding crack. "You cannot sell what you do not own," I said, my voice echoing through the silent kitchen. "Read it." Brad stormed over, practically ripping the heavy paper off the counter. Keisha hovered over his shoulder, her eyes darting frantically across the legal text. They scanned the property address, the parcel number, and the official transfer dates. Then their eyes hit the bottom line. The color drained from their faces simultaneously. The official deed did not say Vivian's name. It did not say Big Mama's name. It did not reflect any trace of my toxic family. The registered legal owner of the property was clearly printed in bold, undeniable black ink: Sienna Holdings, LLC. Brad stared at the heavy parchment paper as if it were laced with poison. His eyes locked onto the bold black ink spelling out my company name. Keisha leaned closer, her acrylic nails gripping the edge of the marble island, so tightly her knuckles turned white. She read the letters entirely silently. The cognitive dissonance was beautiful to witness. They spent their lives convincing themselves I was nothing. Now the proof of my supremacy sat right in front of them. "This is a fake!" Brad finally sputtered, his voice cracking like a terrified teenager. "You printed this off the internet. You cannot possibly own this property. Vivian has the original deed in her safe box." "Vivian has a piece of paper that became legally void 36 months ago," I corrected, stepping around the island and leaning comfortably against the pristine granite. "I know reading comprehension is not your strong suit, Brad, but let me break down the timeline for you. 3 years ago, you two decided you needed a destination wedding in Tulum. You needed the ice sculptures, the celebrity DJ, and the custom Vera Wang gown to post on social media. But you were broke. You have always been broke." Keisha's head snapped up, her eyes blazing with a mixture of shame and fury. "Do not talk about my wedding. Mom paid for that out of her savings." I laughed, a harsh sound echoing loudly. "Mom does not have savings, Keisha. She has a shopping addiction and a desperate need to impress people at church. To fund your ridiculous social media spectacle, she secretly took out a second mortgage on this exact house, Big Mama's house. The legacy our grandmother broke her back to build. Vivian leveraged it all so you could drink vintage champagne on a beach in Mexico." Brad stepped back, wiping the sweat from his upper lip. "That is a lie. She told us the house was free and clear." "Well, she lied to her golden children," I said smoothly. "She mortgaged the property to the absolute limit. And because neither of you have ever understood the concept of fiscal responsibility, nobody helped her make the payments. 18 months after your fabulous wedding, she defaulted. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings. Big Mama's house was exactly 4 days away from being auctioned off on the county courthouse steps to the highest bidder." Keisha shook her head frantically. "No, no, that is impossible. Mom would have told us. She would have asked for help." "Asked you for help?" I raised an eyebrow, my voice dripping with pure disdain. "With what money?" "Keisha, Brad's declining commissions, your overdrawn credit cards. Vivian knew you were useless. The bank was coming to change the locks, and she was too ashamed to tell the congregation she had gambled away our grandmother's legacy. So the bank put the debt on the private commercial market. My financial technology firm monitors those distressed asset portfolios. When I saw the address cross my desk, I did not hesitate. Sienna Holdings, LLC bought the debt entirely in cash. I paid off the mortgage, cleared the liens, and transferred the deed legally into my corporate portfolio. I have been the sole owner of this property for over a year. I pay the property taxes. I pay the insurance. You are standing in my house." Before Keisha could utter another word of denial, the heavy oak front door swung open with a loud bang. High heels clattered aggressively against the hardwood floor of the foyer. "Brad, Keisha, did the investor sign the papers?" Vivian's voice rang out, vibrating with greedy anticipation. My mother marched into the living room, completely oblivious to the radioactive tension suffocating the air. She wore her Sunday best, a tailored sapphire suit, and a matching wide-brimmed hat, clearly dressing the part of the wealthy matriarch she so desperately pretended to be. Trailing lazily behind her was my younger brother Darius. He was dragging his feet, wearing expensive sneakers he definitely had not paid for himself, typing away on his latest smartphone. Vivian stopped dead in her tracks when she saw me standing in the kitchen. Her confident smile completely shattered, replaced by a look of sheer, unfiltered panic. "Sienna," Vivian gasped, clutching her designer purse against her chest. "What are you doing here? You are supposed to be at work." "It is my property, Mother," I said, pointing directly at the certified deed resting on the island. "I can visit my investments whenever I please." Darius finally looked up from his phone, sensing the hostile atmosphere. He glanced at the paperwork, then at Brad's terrified, sweating face. Vivian rushed over to the counter. She snatched up the heavy paper, her eyes scanning the legal jargon. I watched the exact moment her entire world collapsed. Her knees buckled slightly, but she caught herself against the marble edge. She knew exactly what that document meant. She knew her massive deception had just been dragged into the broad daylight. I waited for the apology. I waited for my mother to show even a single ounce of remorse for risking our grandmother's legacy, for lying to her family, or for trying to illegally sell a house out from under me. I should have known better. Empathy did not exist in Vivian's vocabulary. Instead of apologizing, my mother's face immediately hardened into a mask of pure entitlement. She slammed the deed back onto the counter. "You were always a sneaky girl," Vivian hissed, pointing directly at me. "You bought this house to humiliate me, but you will absolutely fix this right now. You will sign this deed over to Brad." I stared at her, genuinely amazed. "Excuse me." "You heard me," Vivian screamed. "Brad owes $500,000 to very dangerous men. If he does not pay them, they will break his legs, and Keisha will lose everything. You have plenty of money. Sign the house over to your brother-in-law right now or else." Vivian did not wait for my response. She marched forward, her heels striking the floorboards with aggressive entitlement. She reached into her handbag, pulled out a gold pen, and slammed it onto the marble island right next to the certified deed. She grabbed my wrist, her fingers digging into my skin, attempting to physically force the pen into my palm. "Sign it," Vivian commanded, her voice vibrating with a desperate, chaotic authority. "You will cross out that ridiculous company name and sign this property over to Brad. We are family Sienna. We protect our own. You are going to fix this mess today." I looked at her hand, clutching my wrist. I did not pull away immediately. I let the silence stretch, allowing the audacity of her physical demand to hang in the air. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, I twisted my arm and shoved her hand away. The gold pen clattered across the pristine granite countertop and fell heavily onto the floor. "Do not ever put your hands on me again," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly, icy whisper. Vivian stumbled backward, clutching her chest as if I had forcefully struck her. Keisha gasped loudly, rushing to our mother's right side. "How dare you speak to her like that?" Keisha yelled, her face contorted in absolute outrage. "She is your mother. She gave you life. She gave me life. And then she spent the next 34 years making sure I knew I was the biggest disappointment in it." I fired back, my gaze shifting between the two women who had tormented me for decades. I stepped around the island, backing them toward the foyer. "You want to talk about family protection, Vivian? Let us talk about it. Let us talk about when I was 18 years old working 2 minimum wage jobs just to afford community college." Vivian avoided my eyes, her posture stiffening. "This is not the time to bring up the past." "Oh, it is the perfect time," I countered, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I needed a $5,000 student loan to finish my degree. I begged you to co-sign. Do you remember what you told me? You looked me dead in the face and said I needed to learn independence, that investing in me was a financial risk you simply could not afford to take." I pointed a finger at Brad, who was cowering near the front door. "But this man, a white real estate agent who drives a leased Mercedes and wears cheap suits, you gladly mortgaged your own mother's legacy to fund his fake empire. You handed him the keys to our family history just so Keisha could maintain the illusion of a wealthy marriage on social media. You risked everything for the golden child and you lost." Darius finally looked up from his smartphone, attempting to play the tough younger brother. "Come on, Sienna. Do not do mom like this. Brad just hit a rough patch in the market. You have millions now. Just help him out so we can go back to normal." "Normal?" I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "Normal is you sitting on Vivian's couch playing video games while she pays your cell phone bill, Darius. You do not get a vote in this house. You do not even pay rent." Brad swallowed hard, taking a tentative step forward. "Sienna, please. You do not understand the people I owe money to. They are not the bank. They do not care about legal extensions. They are going to ruin my life and they will take Keisha down with me." "Your debt is not my problem, Brad," I said, my tone completely devoid of empathy. "I am not your savior. I am not your backup plan. I am the woman you planned to trick into missing Christmas, so you could steal my property from right under my nose. I saw the 67 text messages. I saw every single word." The collective gasp in the room was absolute perfection. Keisha's jaw dropped. Vivian turned a sickly shade of gray. They had entirely forgotten about the accidental group chat in the midst of the deed revelation. Yes, I nodded, enjoying the sheer terror washing over their faces. I read how you were going to lie to me about the dates. I read how I was just a thorn in your side. You plotted to exclude me from my own family, but you forgot one crucial detail. You forgot whose name was on the deed. I walked to the front door and yanked it wide open. The freezing winter wind rushed into the foyer, chilling the tension in the room. "Get out," I commanded. "Every single one of you, get out of my house." "You cannot do this!" Keisha shrieked, tears of genuine panic finally spilling down her cheeks. "Where are we supposed to go? How are we supposed to fix this?" "That sounds like a problem for your wildly successful husband to solve," I replied effortlessly. "Now leave before I call the police and have you all arrested for trespassing." Darius was the first to move, slipping out the door without a backward glance. Brad grabbed Keisha by the arm, dragging his sobbing wife out into the cold driveway. Vivian was the last to cross the threshold. She stopped on the porch, turning back to face me with a look of pure, unadulterated venom. "You think you have won because you have a piece of paper," Vivian screamed, her voice carrying down the quiet suburban street. "You think you can disrespect me and humiliate your sister without consequences. I will destroy you, Sienna. I will go to Sunday service tomorrow and tell the entire congregation exactly what you did. I will drag your name through the mud until this whole community knows you are a treacherous, greedy snake who threw her own mother out." I smiled, completely unbothered by her desperate tantrum. "I will see you at church, Mother." I slammed the heavy oak door shut, turning the brass deadbolt securely. That night, the silence of my home felt like an absolute victory. But my work was not entirely finished. The next morning, I drove directly to Pastor William's church. The oak floorboards creaked beneath my boots as I bypassed the pews. The congregation's murmurs died into a suffocating silence. Hundreds of eyes tracked my movement. I did not stop until I reached the pulpit. Pastor Williams took a hesitant step backward, bewildered by my intrusion. Down in the front row, Vivian, Keisha, and Brad sat with expressions of smug satisfaction. They truly believed I had come to the altar to beg for forgiveness, to surrender Big Mama's house to avoid excommunication. I placed the red financial audit folder onto the wooden podium, the sharp smack cutting through the quiet room. I pulled the microphone downward. "Good morning," I said, my voice echoing clearly. "I know many of you expected a heartfelt apology. My mother and sister have spent the last 30 minutes painting a compelling picture. They told you I am a greedy daughter who stole a widow's home before the holidays. They brought Brad here, the supposed upstanding family man, to tell you how he worked tirelessly to save our family." Vivian nodded vigorously, dabbing her dry eyes with a handkerchief. Keisha crossed her arms, smirking in triumph, while Brad adjusted his expensive tie, playing the role of the humble savior perfectly. "I am not here to defend myself regarding my grandmother's property." I continued, staring directly into Brad's pale eyes. "The county clerk's office holds the certified deed, and the truth is a matter of public record. No, I did not walk up to this pulpit to discuss my private real estate. I came here to discuss your money." A collective gasp rippled through the sanctuary. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Pastor Williams stepped forward, raising his hand. "Sienna, this is a place of worship," Pastor Williams warned gently. "If you are not here to seek reconciliation with your family, I must ask you to step down." "With all due respect, Pastor, you will want to hear this," I replied, maintaining absolute authority. "As many of you know, I run a financial technology firm in Atlanta. We build software that tracks digital footprints and hidden market trends. What you do not know is that every December my firm selects local organizations for a comprehensive free digital audit. We update cybersecurity and ensure financial infrastructure is sound. This year, to honor Big Mama's decades of devotion to this congregation, I chose this church." Brad's smug expression instantly vanished. The color drained from his face with such violent speed that he looked physically ill. He grabbed the edge of the wooden pew in front of him, his knuckles turning stark white. During our routine sweep Wednesday, my algorithms flagged a massive series of anomalies within the church's primary accounts, I said, flipping open the heavy red folder. Specifically, the accounts tied to the new community center building fund. Pastor Williams frowned, his posture stiffening. The building fund. Brad has been volunteering as the treasurer for that fund for the past 2 years. The accounts are perfectly fine. The accounts are bleeding dry, I corrected loudly, projecting my voice so everyone in the back row could hear me. According to the encrypted bank records I am holding, over $250,000 have been systematically siphoned out of community donations over the last 14 months. The congregation erupted into a chorus of shocked shouts and angry whispers. Vivian dropped her lace handkerchief, staring at me in total disbelief. Keisha aggressively grabbed Brad's arm, demanding to know what I was talking about, but Brad was completely paralyzed. "Lies!" Brad suddenly screamed, his voice cracking loudly. He jumped out of the front pew, pointing a trembling finger at the pulpit. "She is lying. Pastor, you know me. I managed those funds meticulously. She is just trying to deflect attention away from what she did to her mother. I have the wire transfer receipts, Brad." I fired back, holding up a stack of highlighted bank statements. "You did not even try to hide the digital trail. You routed the donations through a dummy corporation in Delaware. From there, the money was wired directly into the escrow accounts of 3 commercial real estate properties. Properties that you personally own, Brad. Properties that were facing imminent foreclosure until you paid off the arrears, using the tithes and offerings of these good people." "No!" Brad shouted, looking around frantically, as the faces of the congregation turned from confusion to absolute, unadulterated fury. The market shifted. It was just a temporary loan. I was going to put the money back before the construction started. "You bought a $70,000 luxury vehicle 3 weeks ago," I reminded him mercilessly. "You bought your wife a destination wedding in Tulum. You financed your fake lifestyle by stealing from the very community you pretended to serve." Pastor Williams looked devastated. He signaled to the back of the room. 4 heavily built deacons men who had poured their own paychecks into that building fund stood up simultaneously. They marched down the center aisle, their expressions dark and uncompromising, forming a tight, inescapable circle around Brad. "Pastor, please let me explain," Brad begged, shrinking back against the wooden pew as the deacons closed in. "It was just a cash flow issue." Vivian sat frozen in horror, realizing the man she worshipped had just destroyed her reputation, permanently. But Keisha did not freeze. Driven by toxic desperation, my sister shoved her way past the deacons and marched right up to the edge of the pulpit. She reached over the polished wood and grabbed my wrist, her fingernails digging painfully into my skin. "You think you have won because you embarrassed us?" Keisha hissed, her voice a venomous threat meant only for my ears as the congregation shouted around us. "You are going to regret this, Sienna. I found a legal loophole in your corporate paperwork. Enjoy your little victory today, because we are taking Big Mama's house back on Christmas Eve, and nothing can ever possibly stop it now." I yanked my arm out of Keisha's frantic grip, smoothing my coat with composure. I did not bother responding to her delusional threat. Let her believe she had the upper hand. I turned my back on the chaotic sanctuary, leaving Brad sweating in the center of the enraged deacons and Vivian sobbing in the front pew. The crisp Sunday air outside the church felt refreshing. I climbed into my Porsche and drove straight to my corporate headquarters in downtown Atlanta. The building was empty, bathed in the quiet hum of servers and the soft glow of standby lights. I swiped my biometric badge, bypassed the executive suites, and locked myself inside the primary server room. If Keisha thought she found a loophole in my filings, she vastly underestimated the attorneys I kept on retainer. But her desperate threat about Christmas Eve intrigued me. I needed to know exactly how they planned to steal a property they did not legally own. I powered up my workstation, accessing the proprietary surveillance software my company developed for financial investigations. It was time to hunt. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, initiating a deep dive into Brad's digital footprint. I did not need to hack into anything illegal. People like my brother-in-law leave massive, sloppy trails of public data scattered across the internet. I started by pulling public records from the Georgia Real Estate Commission. The database updated instantly on my monitors. I smiled a cold, victorious smile. As of yesterday evening, Brad's real estate broker license had been officially and indefinitely suspended, pending a formal state investigation. Mr. Sterling had kept his promise. Without an active license, Brad could not legally facilitate a property transfer access, the multiple listing service, or collect a single cent in commission. His professional life was entirely over. But a suspended license would not stop a man cornered by a $500,000 debt to dangerous creditors. I expanded the search parameters, running his phone number, email addresses, and known internet protocol addresses through a specialized tracking algorithm. I was looking for anomalies, recent large transfers, or unusual communications. Within 20 minutes, the system flagged a highly suspicious pattern of encrypted traffic originating from Brad's home network. Brad was not just browsing the regular internet. He was routing his connection through a cheap, easily traceable virtual private network to access the dark web. He was communicating frantically with a digital entity known only by an alphanumeric string. I ran a cross-reference on the entity's blockchain transaction history. It was a digital storefront for a disbarred notary public who specialized in producing fraudulent legal seals and backdated documentation for offshore shell companies. I leaned closer to the monitor, watching the decrypted metadata scroll across the screen. Brad and Keisha were not trying to find a legitimate legal loophole in my company structure. They were planning to bypass my corporate shield entirely by attacking my personal identity. My software intercepted a compressed file Brad sent to the shady notary. I decrypted the payload and opened the document. It was a scan of an old expired power of attorney form I foolishly signed over to Vivian a decade ago when I was a broke college student studying abroad. The document had been legally voided for years, but the scan clearly showed my original authentic signature at the bottom. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. They were going to forge my signature. Keisha and Brad were paying this dark web notary to create a backdated fraudulent transfer of ownership signing Big Mama's house from Sienna Holdings LLC back over to Vivian using the old power of attorney. Once the property was back in Vivian's name on their fake paper, Brad could act as her proxy and sell it for cash. It was a wildly illegal, desperate, and incredibly stupid plan. The county clerk would eventually flag the fraudulent transfer, but by the time the bureaucratic red tape caught up with the paperwork, Brad would have already pocketed the buyer's cash and paid off his violent creditors. He did not care about the long-term legal fallout. He only cared about surviving the week. He was willing to risk federal prison to save his own skin, taking Keisha and my mother down into the mud with him. I watched the progress bar on my screen, confirmed that the forged documents had been generated, and downloaded back to Brad's computer. A fraudulent deed was useless without a buyer willing to hand over a duffel bag full of untraceable cash. I needed to know who Brad was targeting. I set a trap on my server, running a script to intercept any outgoing emails containing the property address. I did not have to wait long. An hour later, a new email pinged my dashboard. It was sent from a burner account, but the originating address belonged to Brad. The recipient was an out-of-state private investor from Miami, someone notorious in industry circles for buying distressed properties, sight unseen for pure cash. Brad pitched the house as a historic off-market steal due to a sudden family tragedy. He claimed the paperwork was completely ready, and the closing could happen immediately. He attached the forged documents to prove he had the authority to initiate the rapid sale. I opened the secondary attachment Brad had included in the email. It was a beautifully designed invitation dripping with Keisha's tacky aesthetic. The bold gold lettering invited this naive cash buyer to an exclusive Christmas Eve gala at Big Mama's house. Brad promised a festive holiday celebration where the final contract would be signed over champagne and roasted turkey. They roped Darius and Vivian into hosting a fake, luxurious holiday party to create an illusion of wealthy stability for their clueless target. They were going to break into my property, drink my wine, and try to sell my house right out from under me. I printed the email, folded it neatly, and placed it inside my red folder. That thick red folder held every single piece of evidence I needed to permanently dismantle their deceitful existence. I secured it inside my desk drawer, patiently waiting for the holiday week to pass. When Christmas Eve finally arrived, a heavy, freezing rain washed over the sprawling city of Atlanta, turning the busy streets incredibly slick and dangerously dark. I was sitting in my luxurious penthouse miles away from the historic neighborhood, staring at a massive grid of high-definition security feeds on my secondary monitor. I installed hidden motion-activated cameras throughout Big Mama's house shortly after my limited liability company purchased the deed. My family thought the house was empty and completely neglected. They had no idea they were starring in a live broadcast, and I had a front-row seat to their impending destruction. The camera in the foyer blinked to life at exactly 6 in the evening. I watched closely as the heavy brass deadbolt turned. Brad had obviously hired a locksmith to bypass my security upgrades, a desperate move that would add breaking and entering to his growing list of federal charges. The door swung open and my family poured into my home like a swarm of greedy locusts. Vivian marched in first, wearing a floor-length emerald evening gown, and directing Darius to carry 2 massive boxes of holiday decorations. Keisha followed closely behind her, barking loud orders at Brad, who was struggling to haul a catered holiday feast through the doorway. They moved with a manic, frantic energy. Over the next hour, I watched through the various camera angles as they transformed my quiet, historic property into a loud, ostentatious movie set. They draped cheap, glittering garlands over Big Mama's original oak staircase. They arranged the catered turkey and crystal champagne flutes on the formal dining table. Vivian flitted around the living room arranging throw pillows and playing the role of the wealthy, benevolent matriarch to absolute perfection. They were setting a honey trap for the Miami investor, trying to project a flawless illusion of unbothered generational wealth. It was a pathetic, transparent charade. I zoomed in on the kitchen camera. Brad was pacing back and forth, holding his leather briefcase tightly against his chest. He pulled out the forged deed and placed it precisely in the center of the kitchen island, adjusting it so the signature line faced the investor's designated bar stool. He was sweating again. He knew the massive risk he was taking, but his desperate greed had completely blinded his common sense. Most people in my position would have simply picked up their cell phone and dialed 911. It would have been incredibly easy to send the local Atlanta Police Department to arrest them for simple trespassing. But local police would just write them a citation, issue a small fine, and let them bond out by morning. That was not the level of justice I required today. A simple trespassing charge would not balance the scales for decades of emotional abuse, and it certainly would not pay for the hundreds of thousands of dollars Brad stole from the dedicated church community. I needed a highly tactical strike that would erase their financial and social standing permanently. I picked up my phone and bypassed the local emergency lines entirely. Instead, I dialed a direct extension I had acquired during my firm's cybersecurity work with government agencies. The phone rang twice before a stern voice answered on the other end. I introduced myself and requested an immediate connection to the lead agent of the Federal White-Collar Crime Division. When the agent came on the line, I did not waste time with emotional anecdotes. I spoke with the clinical precision of a data analyst, handing over a fully solved puzzle. I informed him that a suspended real estate broker was currently facilitating an illegal property transfer across state lines using fraudulent documents secured from a dark web entity. I provided the exact address of the property, the name of the out-of-state buyer who was currently en route, and the estimated time the forged contract would be signed. To seal the deal, I mentioned the indisputable evidence of the church embezzlement that accompanied the real estate fraud. The agent asked if I possessed physical proof. I told him I had a thick red folder containing comprehensive digital tracking, databank routing numbers, and intercepted communications that would guarantee a swift federal conviction. He told me to stay put and let his team handle the apprehension. I agreed to hand over the folder, but I politely declined his request to stay away from the property. I had a highly anticipated Christmas party to attend. I ended the call and walked deliberately into my expansive master closet. Tonight was definitely not about blending into the background. Tonight was about standing directly in the absolute center of the wreckage and forcing them to look at the successful woman they constantly tried to break. I bypassed the conservative business suits and reached for a stunning custom-tailored floor-length red gown. The luxurious fabric was heavy silk, draped perfectly to command immediate attention, radiating an intense aura of unapologetic power and absolute control. I applied a bold crimson lipstick, styled my hair with sharp, flawless precision, and secured a shimmering diamond watch around my left wrist. I looked exactly like a powerful woman who already owned the entire room before she even stepped inside. I grabbed the thick red financial audit folder from my secure desk drawer, holding it tightly like an executioner's polished blade. I walked down to the private garage and slid into the soft leather driver's seat of my sleek Porsche. The powerful engine roared to life, unleashing a deep mechanical growl that loudly echoed off the solid concrete walls. I pulled out onto the slick, rain-soaked streets of downtown Atlanta, driving steadily into the freezing cold winter night toward Big Mama's house, heading straight into the ultimate showdown. The freezing rain transitioned into heavy snow by the time I navigated my Porsche into the historic neighborhood. The streets were lined with festive lights, but the brightest display radiated from Big Mama's house. I parked down the block, ensuring my car was hidden by the shadow of a massive oak tree. Through the grand bay windows, the brightly lit interior looked like a perfect scene from a luxury lifestyle magazine. Brad had spared no expense trying to set a deceptive trap for his incredibly wealthy target. I watched him through the cold glass, his cheap suit replaced by a sharp tuxedo, holding expensive champagne. He was laughing loudly, projecting the image of a successful real estate mogul, closing another massive deal. Sitting across from him at the pristine marble kitchen island was the unfortunate target. The cash buyer was an older man in a tailored gray suit, completely captivated by the elaborate illusion my family had constructed. Vivian was holding court in the formal living room, wearing a glittering gold dress, offering hors d'oeuvres, and spinning fabricated family history. Keisha stood near the stone fireplace, sipping champagne and nodding at whatever lie Brad was currently feeding the eager buyer. Darius was hovering near the staircase, playing the role of the diligent, supportive younger brother. Right in the center of the countertop sat the fraudulent contract, waiting patiently for a single damning signature. I stepped out of my vehicle, the freezing wind whipping the hem of my heavy trench coat around my ankles. I unbuttoned the coat and left it draped over the passenger seat, exposing the stunning red silk gown underneath. The bitter cold bit harshly at my bare shoulders, but the righteous adrenaline surging through my veins provided enough heat. I walked up the icy sidewalk, the snow crunching softly beneath my stiletto heels as I approached the massive porch. I did not bother knocking. I reached out, grabbed the heavy brass handle, and pushed the double front doors wide open with absolute unyielding force. The doors hit the interior walls with a resounding crash that loudly echoed over the soft holiday music playing from the surround sound speakers. The freezing winter wind swept violently into the warm, cinnamon-scented foyer. Every single head in the house snapped toward the entrance simultaneously, their expressions shifting instantly. I stepped over the threshold, letting the heavy doors swing shut behind me with a heavy final click. I stood perfectly straight, the vivid crimson fabric of my gown pooling around my feet like a pool of spilled blood. I slowly removed my leather gloves, making direct, unflinching eye contact with Brad. "I am so incredibly sorry for my tardiness," I announced, my voice carrying a clear, piercing authority that instantly dominated the entire house. Traffic was an absolute nightmare, but I simply could not miss a wonderful Christmas Eve party hosted right here in my very own living room. The silence that fell over the property was absolutely deafening, heavy with sudden dread. The gentle holiday jazz playing from the speakers suddenly felt entirely absurd against the radioactive tension suffocating the room. Vivian dropped a crystal plate of expensive appetizers. It shattered against the hardwood floor, sending sharp shards of glass scattering across the pristine rugs. She stared at me, her jaw completely unhinged, her face turning an ashen, sickly shade of gray as she realized her massive error. Keisha lowered her champagne flute, her eyes widening in sheer, unadulterated terror at the sight of my red dress. They had planned for every single contingency, except for the actual homeowner showing up in a custom red gown to crash their felony in progress. The cash buyer blinked in genuine confusion. He looked at the shattered glass on the floor, then at my commanding presence in the doorway, and finally turned his bewildered gaze toward Brad. "Brad, what exactly is going on here?" the buyer asked, his voice laced with sudden apprehension and doubt. Who is this woman, and why is she confidently claiming this is her living room? You specifically assured me your mother-in-law held the deed, and this was an off-market family transfer. Brad was physically shaking, his polished facade cracking instantly. The bottle of champagne in his hand trembled so violently that liquid spilled over the edge, dripping onto the forged contract resting on the marble island. He looked at me, his pale eyes darting wildly around the room as he desperately searched for an escape route that did not exist. His entire fraudulent empire was collapsing right in front of his intended victim, and his fragile ego simply could not process the immediate destruction. Instead of admitting defeat and begging for mercy, Brad chose the absolute worst possible course of action. He doubled down on his ridiculous delusion. Brad forced a painfully loud, completely unnatural laugh that scraped harshly against the high ceilings. He quickly set the champagne bottle down and plastered a fake reassuring smile onto his sweating face as he turned back to the concerned investor. "Please, sir, do not be alarmed." Brad chuckled, frantically wiping his damp forehead with the back of his trembling hand. "I am so deeply sorry for this highly embarrassing interruption. This woman is just an estranged, mentally unstable relative of my wife. She has a terrible history of severe psychological issues and intense substance abuse. She frequently wanders into private family events and makes completely delusional claims about owning our properties. It is a very sad, tragic situation, but I assure you, it is completely under control." The buyer took a cautious step back from the kitchen island, clearly unconvinced by Brad's frantic, sweating performance. Brad turned away from the kitchen island and marched aggressively toward the foyer. His fake smile vanished, replaced by the desperate rage of a cornered animal. He closed the distance with threatening footsteps, intending to use physical force. "You need to leave right now," Brad hissed, lunging forward to violently shove me. Brad's desperate lunge was predictable. I did not brace myself. I pivoted on my heels, stepping smoothly to the left. His momentum carried him forward, causing him to stumble awkwardly past me. He crashed into the grand oak staircase, his shoulder hitting the polished wood with a loud thud. I did not spare him a second glance. My focus was locked onto the cash buyer, who was standing stiffly behind the kitchen island, staring at the chaotic scene unfolding in what was supposed to be a quiet transaction. "Sir, I highly suggest you step away from that document," I said, pointing at the contract resting on the marble countertop. "My name is Sienna, and I am the sole legal owner of this property, under Sienna Holdings, LLC. Whatever Brad told you today is a complete fabrication. If you sign that paperwork and transfer your funds, you are participating in a felony forgery scheme across state lines." The investor's eyes darted down to the contract, then back up to me. He pulled his hands away from the marble island and shoved them deep into the pockets of his gray suit. The golden pen Brad provided rolled across the counter, dropping onto the hardwood floor with a sharp clatter. "What are you talking about?" the buyer demanded, his voice thick with alarm. "Brad showed me the power of attorney. He showed me the authorization form signed by you and your mother." "She is lying to you!" Keisha shrieked, her voice echoing across the ceilings. She rushed to the kitchen island, snatched a stack of stapled papers, and waved them frantically. "Do not listen to a single word she says. She has been trying to sabotage our family for— This is a legally binding power of attorney. She signed it. I have the paperwork right here to prove it." Keisha thrust the documents toward the investor. Her hands shook so violently that the papers rattled loudly. "She is having an episode. She has been in and out of facilities. We are trying to liquidate our own family asset to cover her mounting medical bills, and she is having a paranoid breakdown. Brad is a licensed professional. He would never risk his reputation on something illegal." I let out a slow laugh that cut straight through her hysterical performance. A licensed professional? Brad's real estate broker license was officially suspended by the state commission yesterday afternoon. Furthermore, that power of attorney you are waving around like a victory flag is an expired, legally void document that you illegally paid a dark web notary to backdate and forge. "That is absolute garbage," Darius shouted, stepping out from the shadow of the staircase. My lazy younger brother puffed his chest, trying to project a false sense of masculine authority. He marched over to stand beside Keisha, glaring at me with manufactured outrage. I was sitting right there in the living room when she signed that paper. I watched her put her pen to the document. I am a legal witness to the signature. She knew exactly what she was signing. And now she is throwing a temper tantrum because she wants a bigger cut of the cash. You are a terrible liar, Darius, I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous icy register. You have not witnessed anything except the loading screen of your video games for the past 5 years. You are actively participating in an intricate conspiracy to defraud a private investor, and you are foolish enough to admit it. Vivian realized her golden children were losing control of the narrative. My mother immediately deployed her ultimate weapon. She pressed her hand against her chest, letting out a theatrical sob that could have won her an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress in a fraud scheme. Please, sir, you must forgive my daughter, Vivian cried out, looking at the investor with tear-filled eyes. She has broken my heart 1,000 times. I have prayed for her soul every Sunday, but the devil has a tight grip on her mind. I am just a poor widow trying to preserve what little legacy my husband left behind. She wants to see us out on the street. Please do not let her ruin this blessing. Sign the papers and Brad will escort her out so we can finally have peace. The family united in a desperate attempt to gaslight the investor. Brad recovered from the collision with the staircase, adjusting his tuxedo jacket with trembling hands. He rushed back to the kitchen island, retrieved the gold pen from the floor, and held it out to the buyer with a frantic, pleading smile. You see, sir, it is just an unfortunate family dispute, Brad said, his voice cracking slightly. The paperwork is perfectly legal. The title is clear. You have the cash ready to transfer. We can finalize the deal right now, and you will walk away with the best real estate investment in Atlanta. Do not let her crazy outburst cost you this massive opportunity. We can handle her after the paperwork is finalized. The investor looked around the room, completely overwhelmed by the barrage of conflicting information, theatrical sobbing, and aggressive sales pitches. He stared at the pen in Brad's hand, then looked back at me, standing tall and unbothered in my crimson gown. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not try to match their chaotic energy. I simply exuded the quiet, absolute confidence of a woman holding all the winning cards in a rigged game. I raised my left arm with slow, deliberate grace. The movement caught the warm light of the crystal chandelier, making the diamonds on my custom wristwatch sparkle. I looked at the expensive watch face, noting the exact time. The trap was fully set, the bait was taken, and the timer had finally hit 0. I lowered my arm, looked directly at the front door, and simply said, "You can come in now." The heavy oak doors did not just open. They were thrust inward with a synchronized, overwhelming force that shook the crystal chandelier hanging in the grand foyer. The icy winter wind howled into the house once more, carrying with it a silent, undeniable promise of absolute ruin. My family had spent the last 10 minutes mentally preparing themselves to charm, manipulate, or bribe a pair of bored local police officers. They fully expected a couple of neighborhood patrolmen to respond to a routine domestic disturbance call. They assumed they could use their manufactured affluent facade to write me off as a crazy, disgruntled relative and send the police on their way. Instead, they were greeted by an imposing wall of dark, weatherproof tactical jackets, emblazoned with stark, bright yellow lettering across the front and back. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had officially arrived. A squad of 8 heavily armed, deeply serious federal agents poured into the foyer, moving with the practiced, terrifying efficiency of a coordinated raid. These were not beat cops responding to a noise complaint. These were elite investigators specifically assigned to the white-collar crime division, experts who spent their careers dismantling wire fraud conspiracies, identity theft rings, and interstate real estate scams. They immediately fanned out across the grand room, securing every possible exit and establishing an impenetrable perimeter around the kitchen island where the forged contract still rested. The festive holiday jazz that had been softly playing through the expensive surround sound system was abruptly terminated when an agent unplugged the central media receiver. The sudden, suffocating silence that followed was physically jarring. Vivian stood absolutely frozen in her glittering gold dress, completely incapable of processing the scene unfolding in her stolen living room. The crystal appetizer plate she had been holding slipped from her trembling fingers. It plummeted to the floor, shattering into hundreds of tiny, jagged pieces that scattered across the expensive Persian rug. The sharp, violent sound of breaking glass echoed like a gunshot, but nobody flinched. The elite cash buyer from Miami took one look at the federal agents, let out a massive sigh of profound relief, and backed away from the marble countertop. He moved toward the far wall, putting as much physical distance as humanly possible between himself and Brad. The investor knew instantly that he had narrowly escaped walking into a federal trap that would have tied up his capital in criminal litigation for years. Brad went completely sickeningly pale. His skin turned the color of old ash and his knees visibly buckled beneath him. He grabbed the edge of the kitchen island just to keep himself standing upright. The arrogant, sweating salesman who had lunged at me moments ago was entirely gone. In his place stood a terrified, broken man who finally understood that his desperate scheme had triggered a catastrophic, inescapable avalanche. He stared blankly at the yellow letters on the agents' jackets, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. Keisha let out a high, strangled gasp. She dropped the forged power of attorney papers she had been aggressively waving in my face. The fake documents fluttered uselessly to the floor, landing right next to the shattered crystal. Darius took a frantic, panicked step backward, his eyes darting toward the back patio door, but a federal agent instantly stepped into his path, blocking his only potential escape route. "Nobody moves," the lead agent commanded, his voice cutting through the room with absolute authority. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with graying temples and a sharp, uncompromising stare. He walked directly into the center of the living room, his heavy boots crunching carelessly over the broken glass. "We are securing this location pursuant to an ongoing federal investigation regarding interstate wire fraud, the production of fraudulent legal documents, and the attempted illegal sale of stolen commercial assets." "There must be some kind of massive misunderstanding," Vivian stammered, her voice shaking so violently it was barely recognizable. She desperately tried to revive her wealthy matriarch persona, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. "We are a respectable, God-fearing family. We were just hosting a private holiday gathering. My son-in-law is a licensed professional. You have no right to storm into my home and disrupt our Christmas Eve celebration." "This is not your home, ma'am," the lead agent replied, not offering her an ounce of courtesy or respect. "According to the verified county records, this property is exclusively owned by a private limited liability company. And according to the Georgia Real Estate Commission, your son-in-law's broker license was officially revoked due to severe ethical violations. You are currently trespassing on private property while attempting to execute a federal crime." Brad let out a miserable, pathetic whimper. He looked at Keisha, expecting his golden child wife to somehow save him, but Keisha was paralyzed by sheer terror. She realized that the fake lifestyle she had curated for her social media followers was about to be replaced by a mugshot and a prison jumpsuit. Darius whimpered from the corner, desperately trying to shrink into the shadows of the staircase. The lazy younger brother, who had confidently claimed to be a legal witness to a forgery just minutes ago, was now realizing the severe, life-altering consequences of his monumental stupidity. I stood perfectly still in my crimson gown, watching the empire of lies collapse around them. I did not gloat. I did not smile. I simply watched the inevitable, calculated destruction of the people who had tried to erase my existence. The lead agent turned his attention away from my mother and focused directly on the sweating, hyperventilating man gripping the marble counter. The agent reached inside his dark tactical jacket. He did not pull out a pair of heavy metal handcuffs right away. Instead, he pulled out a thick, familiar object that made Brad's eyes widen in sheer horror. The lead agent held up the exact same thick red financial audit folder I compiled announcing warrants for Brad, Keisha, and Darius. "Bradley Thomas Keisha, Thomas and Darius Vance," the lead agent announced, his voice booming over the collective gasps of the elegantly dressed party guests. "I have federal warrants for your immediate arrest." Absolute chaos erupted in the center of the grand living room. The illusion of the untouchable wealth of my family shattered instantly, replaced by a scene of pure, unadulterated panic. Two federal agents moved with terrifying speed, bypassing the trembling matriarch and heading straight for the man in the cheap tuxedo. Brad tried to scramble backward, his polished leather shoes slipping on the hardwood floor and sliding through the shattered crystal of the broken appetizer plate. He threw his hands up in a desperate, pathetic gesture of surrender, his palms facing the ceiling as an agent firmly grabbed his right shoulder. The sharp, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs, locking around his wrists, echoed like a final verdict. The elite cash buyer from Miami, who had been lingering near the kitchen island, let out a loud, colorful string of profanities. He practically sprinted toward the front door, furiously dialing his legal team on his cell phone, abandoning his pristine gray overcoat on a velvet chair in his haste to escape the federal raid. The remaining party guests, individuals. My mother had invited specifically to showcase her fabricated societal status. Began murmuring in sheer horror. Some pulled out their smartphones, snapping frantic photos and recording clear videos of the spectacular downfall. "Get off of me!" Brad screamed, struggling uselessly against the iron grip of the highly trained federal agents. "I am a legitimate businessman. I have an executive real estate license. This is a complete setup. You absolutely have the wrong guy." The lead agent did not even blink at the hysterical, pathetic outburst. He calmly opened the thick red financial audit folder, the exact portfolio I had compiled, and pulled out a stack of highlighted banking documents. "You have the right to remain silent," the agent recited, his voice incredibly steady and relentless. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." Brad thrashed wildly, his face turning a deep mottled purple. "I am completely innocent. My mother-in-law explicitly authorized the sale. She gave me the legal power of attorney. I was just executing a simple family property transfer." The lead agent stepped closer, bringing the stark, brutal reality of this terrifying situation crashing down onto the head of Brad. "We are not arresting you for a simple property dispute, Bradley. We are taking you into federal custody for multiple counts of interstate wire fraud, malicious identity theft, and the systematic embezzlement of over $250,000 from a registered religious charity. We have the encrypted dark web logs, the forged legal seals, and the offshore routing numbers. You are looking at several decades in federal prison." Upon hearing the horrifying words, "federal prison," Darius made a sudden frantic dash toward the formal dining room. My lazy, entitled younger brother, who had spent his entire adult life actively avoiding hard work, suddenly found the immense energy to sprint. He blindly knocked over a tall silver candelabra, sending lit taper candles crashing onto the expensive Persian rug. He did not make it more than 5 feet. A broad-shouldered tactical agent tackled him cleanly around the waist, taking him down to the floor with a heavy, sickening thud. "I did not do anything wrong," Darius wailed, pressing his sweaty face against the polished wood as the agent pulled his arms firmly behind his back. "I just live here. I live with my mom. I did not sign any fake papers today. Brad made me do it. He said he would buy me a brand new car if I played along." Vivian watched her golden son-in-law and her precious baby boy get physically restrained like common criminals. She placed both shaking hands over her mouth, letting out a series of high-pitched, hyperventilating shrieks. Her meticulously crafted image of a pious, wealthy Southern matriarch was dissolving right in front of the elite social circle she had spent decades trying to impress. The distinguished guests she had intended to dazzle were now watching her family be systematically dismantled by the United States government. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a chaotic mixture of sheer terror and disbelief, but I offered her absolutely nothing. No sympathy, no rescue, no grace. The brutal reality of the situation finally pierced through the impenetrable wall of blind arrogance surrounding Keisha. She watched the unyielding agents hoist her humiliated husband to his feet, his wrists bound tightly behind his back. She watched her younger brother sobbing pitifully on the floor. She realized that her designer wardrobe, her luxury vehicle, and her entire social media persona had been entirely funded by stolen church donations and fraudulent real estate deals. The lavish, extravagant lifestyle she had endlessly weaponized against me was entirely fake, and now the devastating bill had finally come due. The federal agent approached her holding a second pair of cold steel handcuffs. Keisha let out a guttural, agonizing scream. She did not run away. She did not fight the approaching agents. Instead, she spun around and dropped heavily to her knees right in front of me. The loud thud of her kneecaps hitting the hardwood floor reverberated throughout the grand foyer. She reached out with trembling, desperate hands and tightly grabbed the vibrant crimson silk of my custom-tailored gown. Sienna, please. Keisha sobbed salty tears and dark mascara streaming rapidly down her panicked face, completely ruining her perfect makeup. Her fingers dug frantically into the expensive fabric of my beautiful dress. Please, you have to tell them to stop. You have to fix this. We are your family. We share the exact same blood. You cannot send your own sister to a federal prison. You cannot do this to me. I looked down at the pathetic weeping woman groveling on the hardwood floor, feeling absolutely nothing. There was no sympathy, no lingering sibling loyalty, and certainly no desire to offer mercy. Keisha's manicured fingers were still gripping the red silk of my gown, like a drowning sailor clinging to a life raft. I reached down, grabbed her wrists with deliberate force, and peeled her hands off my clothing. I smoothed the wrinkled fabric, taking a slow step backward to create a clear, physical boundary between us. Keisha stayed on her knees, looking up at me with wide, bloodshot eyes, completely stripped of her usual arrogance. The elite party guests watched in stunned silence as the golden child of our family was reduced to a begging, sniveling mess. Several of the wealthy attendees, individuals my mother had desperately tried to impress, all evening actually pulled out their smartphones to record the humiliating spectacle. They whispered among themselves, pointing at the fake real estate agent and his hysterical wife. The carefully constructed facade of a flawless upper-class Southern family had been entirely dismantled in front of the exact people they idolized. "You want to talk about blood, Keisha?" I asked, my voice deadly calm, slicing through the heavy tension of the grand foyer. "You want to weaponize our shared DNA now that you are staring down the barrel of a federal indictment. Let us talk about blood. Blood does not plot to leave you in the cold while they sell your grandmother's legacy. Blood does not pay off your husband's debts using forged signatures and dark web notaries. Blood does not create a secret group chat with 67 messages dedicated entirely to ruining my life. You laughed about it. You celebrated my exclusion as if my absence was the greatest holiday gift you could possibly receive." Keisha flinched violently, letting out a sharp gasp. The realization that I had seen every single word they typed finally pierced through her panic. "Oh, yes." I continued, pacing slowly in front of her. "I read it all. I read how you and Brad needed this cash to save your fraudulent lifestyle. I read Darius telling you to give me the wrong date for Christmas dinner, adding a laughing emoji, while he helped you steal my property. I read our mother explicitly ordering you to make sure I did not find out because I was just a thorn in her side. I spent my entire life trying to earn a place at this family table." I said, my words striking her like physical blows as she wept. "You spent your entire life tearing me down to make yourself feel superior. You paraded your college degree, your expensive wedding, and your wealthy white husband in my face at every possible opportunity. You called me a failure. You mocked my business, calling it a silly little hobby for years. You told everyone I was mentally unstable today, just to protect your scam. And yet here you are kneeling on the floor of my house begging the sister you despise to save you from a prison cell. You are not a victim, Keisha. You are a willing, eager participant in a federal crime, and you are finally facing the consequences of your own greed." Keisha covered her face with her trembling hands, letting out a loud, agonizing wail. She had no defense. She had no clever comebacks or snide remarks left in her arsenal. The federal agents did not wait for her to finish crying. They moved with a cold, terrifying efficiency. Two officers stepped forward, grabbed her by the arms, and hauled her roughly to her feet. The cold steel handcuffs snapped securely around her wrists, identical to the ones currently binding her sweating, ruined husband. "Sienna, I am sorry," Keisha screamed as the agents pulled her away from me. "I was just trying to save my marriage. Brad promised me he would fix everything. Please do not let them take me." I did not answer her. I simply watched as the agents read her rights in front of everyone. Across the room, the tactical agents were dragging a sobbing Darius up from the Persian rug. My younger brother was a complete mess, crying uncontrollably and pleading with the officers that he was just following orders. He claimed he did not know it was a federal crime to witness a forged signature. The agents ignored his pathetic excuses, securing his wrists tightly behind his back. The heavy metal handcuffs clinked sharply, a sound that finally silenced his whining. He looked absolutely terrified, realizing his free ride was ending in a maximum security facility. Vivian watched the absolute destruction of her carefully curated family. Her golden daughter was in handcuffs. Her affluent son-in-law was facing decades behind bars. Her precious youngest son was being read his Miranda rights. The matriarch who had ruled our family through fear, manipulation, and conditional love was watching her entire kingdom burn to ash in a matter of minutes. I waited for her to defend them. I waited for her to scream at the federal agents or threaten me with divine retribution again. Instead, Vivian did something incredibly revealing. She looked at Brad shivering in his cheap tuxedo. She looked at Keisha, whose mascara stained her cheeks. Then she looked at Darius, her lazy, dependent baby boy. Vivian made a rapid, ruthless calculation. She assessed the grim reality unfolding in my grand foyer. She knew that defending the primary instigators of a federal scam would only drag her down into the criminal indictment. She realized Brad and Keisha were completely unsalvageable, permanently doomed by their own digital paper trail and undeniable financial records. She turned her back on her golden daughter entirely. Vivian rushed forward, abandoning Brad and Keisha, entirely dropping to her knees in the broken glass. She desperately reached out her trembling hands, begging Sienna to at least save her baby boy Darius from federal accessory charges. "Please, Sienna, you have to tell these men to let him go," Vivian cried out, her voice cracking as the sharp edges of shattered crystal bit deeply into the delicate fabric of her expensive gold evening dress. She completely ignored the dark blood welling around her bruised knees, entirely consumed by the sudden terrifying prospect of losing her youngest child to the federal penal system. She crawled a few desperate inches forward, her trembling hands reaching out to tightly grasp the heavy silk hem of my crimson gown, completely abandoning the dignified, affluent persona she had spent decades meticulously crafting. Darius is just a naive, foolish boy. He does not know anything about complex wire fraud or fake real estate deeds. He just did exactly what Brad told him to do. You have the power to stop this terrible nightmare right now. You are the wealthy CEO of a massive company. You have elite lawyers. Tell these federal agents you made a mistake. Tell them Darius was not involved in this transaction. He will never survive in a harsh prison environment. I looked down at the weeping woman who had brought me into this world, feeling an intense glacial calm wash over my entire body. I did not bend down to help her up from the broken glass. I did not offer a single word of comfort. I simply took a deliberate, measured step back, forcing her grasping fingers to fall empty against the cold hardwood floor. "He is 28 years old, Mother," I replied, my voice echoing loudly and clearly in the cavernous foyer. "He is a fully grown adult who actively chose to participate in a severe criminal conspiracy simply because he was promised a luxury sports car purchased with stolen church money. He stood right there in the living room, looked an elite investor directly in the eye, and confidently lied about witnessing my signature on a forged legal document. He dug his own grave today, and now he gets to lie in it." Vivian let out a heartbreaking, desperate wail. "How can you be so incredibly cruel to your own flesh and blood? Where is your compassion? Where is your forgiveness?" The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy of her frantic questions ignited a righteous, burning anger deep within my chest. I stared directly into her tear-filled eyes, refusing to let her look away from the catastrophic monster she had personally created. "My compassion ran out the day I graduated high school, and you absolutely refused to attend the ceremony because Keisha urgently needed help picking out a designer sorority dress." I stated my words, slicing violently through the heavy silence of the room. "My forgiveness evaporated the night I practically begged you to co-sign a tiny student loan, and you just laughed right in my face, telling me I was a terrible financial investment who would never actually amount to anything. You always called me a failure. You constantly called me a humiliating embarrassment to this proud family. You told everyone at our local church that I was a stubborn, difficult child who was destined to live a miserable, broke life while Keisha built a massive empire." I took a deep breath, letting the absolute reality of my current power settle over the silent room. I swept my right hand across the grand foyer, gesturing directly toward the pathetic handcuffed figures of her chosen family. "You wanted a successful family, Mother. Look at them now. one in handcuffs, one bankrupt, and one an accessory to a felony. Vivian's mouth opened wide, but no sound came out. The absolute undeniable truth of my brutal statement completely destroyed her remaining emotional defenses. She slumped forward, entirely defeated by the crushing reality of her monumental, lifelong failures. Her golden children were criminals. Her affluent lifestyle was a massive lie, and the daughter she had gleefully discarded was now the only person holding all the cards. I turned my attention away from her sobbing, shaking form and looked directly at the lead federal agent who was standing quietly by the doorway, allowing the domestic confrontation to fully play out. "Agent, these people do not have my legal permission to be on my private property," I instructed, my voice ringing with unwavering, absolute authority. "I want these trespassers cleared from my house immediately." The lead agent nodded sharply, signaling to his heavily armed tactical squad. The federal officers moved with brutal, uncompromising efficiency. They hauled Brad and Keisha toward the grand entrance, completely ignoring their pathetic, desperate, sobbing pleas for mercy and forgiveness. Two other agents grabbed Darius firmly by his shoulders, lifting his crying, limp body off the expensive Persian rug and marching him roughly toward the freezing winter night air outside. Vivian slowly pulled herself up from the broken glass on the floor. Her beautiful gold dress permanently stained and ruined her face, a hollow mask of absolute paralyzing humiliation. She did not try to speak to me again. She did not try to offer another useless apology or beg for another unearned favor. She simply turned around and stumbled blindly toward the front exit, completely broken. The elite party guests, the wealthy investors, and the prominent community members who had been specially invited to witness my family's fabricated triumph stood rigidly by the interior walls. They did not whisper among themselves. They did not pull out their smartphones to record videos anymore. They did not dare to make a single sudden movement that might draw my attention toward them. The heavy oak doors remained wide open, allowing the brutal winter wind to sweep through the foyer, chilling the extravagant holiday decorations and carrying away the last remaining fragments of my toxic family's dignity. Everyone understood that this incredible display of absolute power was an undeniable permanent shift in control. The shocked guests just watch in dead silence as the matriarch and her golden children are marched out into the freezing snow, entirely stripped of their social standing. The heavy oak doors of Big Mama's house slammed shut, sealing out the freezing winter storm and the pathetic wails of the family that had tried to destroy me. I turned slowly to face the remaining guests standing in my grand foyer. The silence was still heavy, thick with the shock of the federal raid, but I broke it with a calm, professional tone. I instructed the caterers to clean up the shattered glass and serve the vintage champagne. The party resumed, but the power dynamic in Atlanta's elite circles had permanently shifted. Word spread faster than a wildfire. By Monday morning, the local Atlanta papers and digital news outlets were having an absolute field day. The headlines were entirely ruthless. Brad's terrified mugshot was plastered across the front page of the financial section. The investigative articles detailed his elaborate church embezzlement scheme, his suspended broker license, and his spectacular arrest at a historic neighborhood property. Pastor Williams held a press conference denouncing him and apologizing to the congregation. The tight-knit community that Vivian had eagerly planned to weaponize against me now viewed her and her golden children as absolute pariahs. They were entirely disgraced. While their fraudulent world burned to the ground, my legitimate empire was just taking off. 3 weeks after the Christmas Eve raid, my financial technology firm officially went public. The initial public offering exceeded all of our wildest market projections. I stood on the balcony of the stock exchange, ringing the opening bell, watching the ticker symbol of my company flash brilliantly across the massive digital screens. I had officially secured my status as a self-made, nine-figure multi-millionaire. The national media praised my innovative algorithms, the exact same surveillance software I had used to trap Brad. I moved my corporate headquarters to a sleek, state-of-the-art skyscraper in Midtown Atlanta. I designed a massive corner office with panoramic views of the entire city I had conquered. A few months into the new year, The dust began to settle, but the desperation of my former family did not. One Tuesday morning, my executive assistant walked into my office and placed a thick, wrinkled envelope on my glass desk. The return address printed in the corner belonged to a county detention center. It was from Vivian. She was not incarcerated, but she had apparently been spending all her time visiting Darius and Brad, trying desperately to scrape together legal defense funds that did not exist. I stared at her familiar looping cursive handwriting. I knew exactly what the letter contained without having to open it. It would be a highly manipulative, tear-stained plea wrapped in heavy religious guilt. She would demand that I pay for top-tier defense attorneys to save her precious baby boy. She would try to remind me of my familial duties, conveniently ignoring the absolute fact that she had tried to leave me with nothing. I picked up the sealed envelope. I did not open it. I did not read a single agonizing word. I walked over to the heavy-duty industrial shredder in the corner of my office, dropped the envelope into the metal slot, and listened to the satisfying mechanical grind as my mother's final attempt at manipulation was reduced to worthless confetti. I returned to my desk, opened my laptop, and reviewed my quarterly projections. The complete detachment I felt was incredibly liberating. The toxic cord had been permanently severed, and I was finally breathing clean air. But the universe has a funny way of bringing the past right back to your front door when you least expect it. My desk intercom buzzed sharply. My head of security, a towering man named Marcus, spoke through the speaker. He informed me that a woman was causing a major scene in the main lobby. She was loudly demanding to speak with the chief executive officer, claiming she was a close blood relative who had a scheduled appointment. I asked Marcus to access the lobby security feed and route it directly to my primary monitor. The high-definition video feed popped up on my screen. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my folded hands. Standing in the middle of my pristine marble-floored corporate lobby was Keisha. The visual transformation was absolutely jarring. The arrogant, boastful woman who had worn designer cocktail dresses and flaunted her expensive Tulum wedding was entirely gone. She looked exhausted, disheveled, and completely broken. She was wearing a faded, oversized trench coat and holding a scuffed, imitation leather handbag. Her perfect Spelman College pageant queen posture had collapsed into a defensive, defeated slouch. I knew from the public court filings that the federal government had frozen all of Brad's assets. Keisha was currently facing a brutal, highly publicized bankruptcy. To shield herself from the criminal fallout, she had hastily filed for divorce, but she was left with absolutely nothing. The bank had repossessed her luxury vehicles. Her country club memberships had been permanently revoked. She was drowning in the massive debt her husband had accumulated, and she had no viable work experience to fall back on. She argued with the front desk receptionist, her voice shrill and desperate, completely lacking her usual toxic superiority. She was frantically gesturing toward the executive elevators, begging the security guards not to escort her out of the building. She had hit absolute rock bottom, and she had come to the only person left in the entire sprawling city of Atlanta who possessed the sheer financial power to save her. I watched her wipe a tear from her cheek, clutching a wrinkled paper resume in her shaking hands. Keisha, the golden child who had relentlessly mocked my business as a silly internet hobby, had bypassed the luxury boutiques and country clubs. She had dragged herself all the way to my massive corporate headquarters, swallowed whatever tiny remaining fraction of pride she had left in her, and showed up at my front door desperately begging for a minimum wage receptionist job today, hoping I would somehow completely forget everything. I pressed the silver intercom button on my glass desk, my eyes still locked onto the high-definition security feed displaying my sister's spectacular downfall. Marcus, do not have her escorted out just yet. I instructed my head of security, keeping my voice perfectly level. I am coming down to the main lobby to handle this situation personally. I stood up, smoothed the invisible wrinkles from my tailored charcoal suit, and walked toward the private executive elevator. The descent from the penthouse to the ground floor took exactly 45 seconds. It gave me just enough time to appreciate the absolute, undeniable poetry of this moment. For over 30 years, Keisha had manipulated our mother, flaunted her unearned wealth, and treated me like a repulsive stain on her perfect life. Now she was weeping in my corporate lobby, praying I possessed a short memory. The polished steel doors slid open with a soft chime. The expansive white marble lobby was bustling with sharp executives, busy couriers, and high-level investors. Right in the center of the organized corporate chaos stood my older sister. She looked even worse in person than she did on the security monitor. The oversized trench coat she wore was heavily stained near the hem, and her normally flawless, expensive hair was pulled back into a messy, uneven knot. She was nervously clutching her thin paper resume, her shoulders hunched defensively. "Keisha," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the ambient noise of the busy lobby. She spun around, her bloodshot eyes widening as she took in my appearance. She looked at my custom suit, the diamond earrings glittering under the recessed lighting, and the two massive security guards standing respectfully at attention a few feet behind me. The stark, undeniable contrast between our current realities hit her like a physical blow. She took a hesitant step forward, attempting to force a fragile, pathetic smile onto her tear-stained face. "Sienna, thank God you came down," Keisha stammered, her voice shaking violently. She reached out as if to hug me, but a single sharp look from me froze her completely in her tracks. She let her arms fall awkwardly back to her sides. "I know we have had our differences. I know I made some terrible mistakes last year. But I am begging you, please. I have absolutely nothing left." Brad's assets were completely frozen by the federal government. The bank took the cars. The landlord evicted me yesterday morning. I am staying on a friend's couch, and I cannot even afford groceries. I will do anything, Sienna. I will answer phones. I will fetch coffee. Just give me a job at the front desk. Please, we are blood. I did not raise my voice. I did not sneer, and I certainly did not offer her a warm, forgiving embrace. I looked at her with the exact same clinical, detached precision I used when analyzing a failing corporate merger. "You are not qualified to answer the phones at my corporate headquarters, Keisha." I stated, my tone devoid of any emotion. "My receptionists hold bachelor degrees in communications and manage highly sensitive non-disclosure agreements. They do not forge legal documents, and they definitely do not aid and abet federal fugitives." Keisha flinched, a fresh wave of tears spilling over her dark eyelashes. "I was manipulated by Brad. You know, I was just trying to keep my family together." "You were manipulated by your own greed," I corrected her, immediately shutting down her ridiculous victim narrative. "You actively mocked me for building this company. You told me I was a bitter, jealous failure. You laughed in a group chat about stealing our grandmother's legacy to fund your fake, luxurious lifestyle. You do not get to rewrite history just because you finally got caught." Keisha let out a miserable, broken sob, hiding her face in her trembling hands. The few passing employees in the lobby averted their eyes, deliberately ignoring the pathetic scene. She was completely stripped of her golden child armor, fully exposed to the harsh, unforgiving reality of the real world. However, I continued, reaching into the inner pocket of my suit jacket. "I did say I believed in independence." Keisha slowly lowered her hands, a tiny, desperate glimmer of hope sparking in her red, swollen eyes. She watched as I pulled out a single, neatly folded piece of white paper. I held it out to her. She practically snatched it from my fingers, quickly unfolding it with shaking hands. Her eyes darted across the printed text. The fragile hope in her expression instantly evaporated, replaced by utter, crushing humiliation. "What is this?" Keisha whispered, her voice barely audible. "It is an employment application," I replied smoothly. "Not for this building, obviously. It is for a subsidiary warehousing facility located 40 miles outside the city limits. They are currently hiring entry-level inventory packers for the overnight shift. It pays exactly $14.50 an hour. It includes comprehensive medical benefits after 90 days, and they provide a uniform." Keisha stared at the paper, as if it were entirely written in a foreign language. "A warehouse packer, Sienna. I cannot work an overnight shift in a warehouse. I have a degree from Spelman College. I am a respectable woman. I cannot do heavy manual labor." "Respectable women do not steal from their grandmothers," I reminded her with surgical precision. "Independence requires extremely hard work, Keisha. It requires waking up when you are exhausted, doing jobs you hate, and earning your own money without relying on handouts or fraudulent schemes. I worked 2 minimum wage jobs to build my empire while you lived in absolute luxury. Now it is your turn to start from the bottom." I took a deliberate step backward, signaling that our brief, pathetic reunion was officially over. "Fill out the application or throw it in the trash," I said, my voice echoing coldly in the marble lobby. "That is the only handout you will ever receive from me. Marcus, please escort my sister out of the building. She has a bus to catch." I did not wait to watch her leave. I turned my back on her sobbing, defeated form and walked straight back to my private elevator. The doors closed completely, shutting out her frantic, begging cries. The power dynamic was permanently inverted. She was nothing to me now. I rode the elevator back up to my penthouse suite, feeling an incredible, overwhelming sense of absolute peace. I walked across the plush carpet and sat down in my luxurious leather executive chair. The toxic chapter of my past was finally, definitively closed. I opened my laptop, ready to review the afternoon market reports. Before my fingers could touch the keyboard, the secure private line on my desk phone began to ring sharply. I picked up the receiver, expecting my financial director. "Sienna Holdings," I answered professionally. "Good afternoon, Ms. Sienna," a formal, distinguished voice replied. "This is the lead director of the Atlanta Historical Preservation Society. We are calling regarding the property registered under your limited liability company. We have an urgent matter to discuss concerning Big Mama's house." "Yes, this is Sienna," I answered, adjusting the receiver. The voice was warm and professional. "Ms. Sienna, this is Marcus Vance from the Atlanta Historical Preservation Society. I am calling to inform you that the board has unanimously approved your application. Your grandmother's property has been designated as a protected historical landmark within the African American community. The paperwork was finalized with the city this morning. This was the ultimate safeguard, the impenetrable fortress I had been building since the night of the federal raid. By classifying the property as a protected historical landmark, I successfully triggered a complex matrix of zoning laws and municipal protections. The house could never be torn down. It could never be leveraged for a predatory loan. It could never be mortgaged to pay off gambling debts or fund a tacky destination wedding. Most importantly, I completely blocked any desperate attempts by estranged blood relatives to lay claim to the physical property. Big Mama's legacy was finally safe from the toxic greed that had infected her descendants. "Thank you, Mr. Vance," I said, a genuine smile breaking across my face. "You have no idea what this means to my family's true legacy. I will have my legal team retrieve the official plaques by Friday." I disconnected the phone. Protecting the house was only the first phase. I refused to let the property sit empty. Big Mama had always been an advocate for community upliftment. She opened her doors to women needing a safe haven. I intended to honor her spirit by weaponizing my wealth for absolute good. Over the next 6 months, I poured capital into a massive renovation of the historic property. I hired an elite team of Black female contractors, architects, and interior designers. We restored the original hardwood floors where Vivian had dropped her shattered plate. We preserved the grand oak staircase where Brad tried to shove me. The most dramatic transformation occurred on the ground level. I knocked down the formal dining room walls and removed the marble kitchen island that briefly held Brad's forged contracts. I built a state-of-the-art community center. The space was bright, welcoming, and equipped with the latest technology. I lined the walls with digital smartboards, installed high-speed internet, and purchased comfortable ergonomic seating. I registered the space as the Vanguard Financial Literacy Center. The curriculum was strictly designed to empower minority women to achieve total financial independence. I hired top-tier financial advisors, real estate attorneys, and entrepreneurs to teach intensive free classes. We offered courses on repairing destroyed credit scores, navigating the real estate market, and identifying predatory lending. We even established a specialized legal clinic dedicated entirely to helping women untangle themselves from financial abuse perpetrated by toxic spouses and manipulative family members. I was actively building an army of financially literate, fiercely independent women who would never have to rely on a crooked husband or a controlling mother to secure their own survival. I was giving them the exact safety net I had to brutally carve out for myself. One brisk afternoon in late November, I visited the property to inspect the final installation of the exterior landmark plaque. The autumn wind rustled the leaves in the front yard, a stark contrast to the freezing snowstorm that blanketed the neighborhood the night I had my family arrested. I walked through the freshly painted doors, breathing in the scent of new upholstery. The oppressive energy Vivian always brought into this space was entirely eradicated. The house felt light, expansive, and peaceful. My lead project manager, a sharp woman named Alana, approached me with a digital tablet clutched in her hands. She wore a bright, satisfied smile, clearly proud of the incredible work her construction team accomplished ahead of our strict schedule. "Everything is completely ready to go, Sienna," Alana announced, tapping her screen to bring up a calendar application. "The local news stations have confirmed their attendance, and the mayor's office wants to send a representative to speak at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. We just need to lock down the exact date for the grand opening event. The public relations team suggested the first week of December to capitalize on the holiday charity news cycle." I took the tablet from her hands, scrolling through the available dates in the month of December. My eyes scanned past the first week, moving steadily toward the middle of the month. My mind instantly flashed back to my luxurious penthouse office. I remembered sitting at my desk watching the rapid-fire notifications light up my personal cell phone. I remembered reading the cruel, calculating messages from my mother, my sister, and my brother as they ruthlessly plotted to steal my property and exclude me from my own family. I found the exact date on the digital calendar. It was a Tuesday. It was the precise, undeniable anniversary of the day Keisha accidentally added me to their secret group chat. It was the exact day my toxic family finalized their blueprint for my destruction, entirely unaware they were actually writing the prologue to my greatest triumph. "No," I said softly, tapping the screen to highlight the specific Tuesday in mid-December. "We are not doing the first week of the month. We are going to host the grand opening right here. Book the caterers, send out the press releases, and finalize the guest list for this exact date." Alana slowly raised an eyebrow, clearly curious about my rigid selection, but she simply nodded in professional agreement. "Consider it fully done, Sienna. Is there a specific reason we are choosing that exact Tuesday?" I smiled, a deeply satisfied expression that radiated absolute power and closure. I handed the tablet back to her, my eyes sweeping across the beautiful restored foyer of Big Mama's house. "It is an incredibly important anniversary," I replied. "It marks the exact day I stopped begging for a seat at a broken table and decided to build my own house." The morning of the grand opening arrived with a cloudless winter sky. The freezing rain that had defined this exact Tuesday 1 year ago was entirely absent, replaced by a crisp golden sunlight that illuminated the pristine exterior of Big Mama's house. The Vanguard Financial Literacy Center was officially open. As I stepped out of my black Porsche, the sheer magnitude of the transformation took my breath away. The historic property stood proudly stripped of the cheap, ostentatious holiday decorations my family had desperately draped over its banisters. In their place were elegant, understated garlands and a large, tasteful brass plaque near the front entrance permanently declaring the building a protected community landmark. A massive crowd had already gathered on the freshly manicured lawn, buzzing with genuine excitement and profound respect. Local news vans lined the street, their cameras pointed at the front porch where a thick crimson ribbon was stretched across the heavy oak doors. I walked up the sidewalk, taking a moment to fully absorb the absolute contrast between this glorious morning and the miserable reality my former family was currently enduring. Their spectacular downfall had been swift, brutal, and entirely permanent. Brad was currently sitting in a cold concrete cell at a federal correctional institution in Florida, serving a mandatory 5-year sentence for interstate wire fraud and embezzlement. He had lost his real estate license, his fake affluent lifestyle, and his freedom in a single devastating blow. Darius, my lazy younger brother, who had arrogantly claimed to witness a forged signature, had narrowly escaped a federal prison term by turning state's evidence against his brother-in-law. He was now serving 3 years of strict, heavily monitored probation. He was legally required to hold a full-time job, forcing him to finally abandon his video games and work grueling manual labor at a local sanitation facility just to meet his court-ordered requirements. The poetic justice handed to Vivian and Keisha was perhaps the most satisfying outcome, stripped of the stolen funds and fraudulent real estate assets they relied on to maintain their toxic, superficial social standing. they were forced into a terrifying new reality. Keisha's highly publicized bankruptcy had drained every bank account she possessed. The bank repossessed her luxury vehicles, and her elite country club permanently banned her. With no viable work experience and a completely ruined reputation, Keisha and Vivian were forced to move into a cramped, dilapidated one-bedroom apartment on the far outskirts of the city. The women who used to boast about destination weddings and designer church hats were now working grueling minimum-wage retail jobs at a discount department store. They spent their days scanning barcodes and folding cheap sweaters, completely cut off from the glamorous luxury they had tried to steal from me. They dug their own financial graves, and now they were forced to live in them. As I approached the bottom of the porch steps, a familiar figure stepped out from the crowd, looking incredibly nervous. It was Pastor Williams, the man who had silently allowed my mother and sister to publicly drag my name through the mud at Sunday service, now approached me with his head bowed in absolute humility. He extended his hand, a tentative apologetic gesture that I observed with cold clinical detachment. I did not reach out to shake it. "Ms. Sienna," Pastor Williams said, his voice completely lacking its usual booming theatrical authority, "I wanted to personally congratulate you on this magnificent achievement. The entire congregation is deeply indebted to you for exposing Brad's terrible deception. We misjudged you entirely. I misjudged you. I hope you can find it in your heart to accept my most sincere apologies for how you were treated in our sanctuary." "Your apology is noted, Pastor," I replied, my tone perfectly polite but devoid of any actual warmth. "But respect is not something you offer only after the truth becomes undeniable. Respect is what you give when it is difficult. Enjoy the ceremony." I walked past his stunned figure and ascended the stairs to the grand porch. The crowd erupted into a roaring round of applause as I took my place behind the polished wooden podium. I looked out over the sea of faces. I saw single mothers, aspiring entrepreneurs, and local community leaders. I saw my dedicated corporate team who supported my vision from the beginning. I saw Alana, my project manager, smiling proudly near the front row. I was surrounded by a chosen family of people who genuinely respected my intellect, my drive, and my absolute refusal to be diminished. I adjusted the microphone, letting the applause slowly fade into a heavy silence. "Welcome to the Vanguard Financial Literacy Center," I announced, my voice echoing powerfully across the historic neighborhood. 1 year ago on this date, in this exact house, I was told I was an invisible burden. I was told my financial independence was merely a resource for others to exploit. The people who shared my blood attempted to sell my grandmother's legacy to fund a fraudulent illusion. I paused, making direct eye contact with the news cameras recording my every word. "They failed," I stated with absolute unyielding certainty. "They failed because they underestimated the power of a financially literate, fiercely independent woman. This center exists to ensure that no woman in this community ever has to rely on a toxic spouse or a manipulative relative for her survival. We are here to teach you how to build your own wealth, secure your own assets, and protect your own legacy. Never let anyone convince you that you are not worthy of a seat at the table. If they refuse to give you a chair, you buy the house." The crowd erupted into deafening, triumphant cheers. I stepped away from the podium, retrieved oversized scissors from my assistant, and grabbed the thick crimson ribbon stretched across the heavy oak doors. I looked at the brass plaque bearing my company's name. I smiled, raising the scissors. I snapped the blades shut. The velvet ribbon drifted down to the concrete porch, marking the end of my painful past and the beginning of my permanent legacy. The crowd erupted into a deafening wave of applause, but my eyes were already looking ahead. I did not look back at the broken pieces of my family, and I did not waste a second dwelling on their fully deserved misery. Exactly 1 year passed since that triumphant winter morning. The biting December winds returned to the busy streets of Atlanta, bringing a heavy frost that coated the neighborhood in a layer of sparkling white ice. However, the warmth radiating from within the sturdy walls of Big Mama's house was entirely different from the bitter cold outside. The Vanguard Financial Literacy Center operated flawlessly during standard business hours, changing the lives of countless minority women. But tonight, on this highly anticipated Christmas day, The expansive ground floor was temporarily transformed back into a vibrant, festive residential sanctuary. The massive stone fireplace was roaring beautifully, casting a rich golden glow across the meticulously restored oak floorboards. A towering, majestic Christmas tree stood proudly in the exact corner of the living room where Vivian used to aggressively arrange her tacky, superficial holiday decorations. This beautiful tree was decorated with elegant, handcrafted ornaments and warm white lights, reflecting an atmosphere of genuine, unadulterated joy instead of manufactured, desperate wealth. The beautiful house was completely filled, but not with the toxic blood relatives who had spent decades plotting my ultimate downfall. There were absolutely no manipulative whispers echoing in the hallways. There were no hidden agendas lurking behind fake smiles, and there were certainly no secret group chats being created to orchestrate my exclusion. Instead, the historic property resonated with the loud, joyful sounds of genuine laughter and the musical clinking of expensive crystal glasses. My chosen family comfortably occupied every single room of the estate. Alana, my brilliant and fiercely loyal project manager, was standing near the grand staircase, arguing playfully about upcoming basketball playoffs with my lead software engineers. Mr. Sterling, the elite corporate investor, who had witnessed Brad's spectacular sweating meltdown during that fateful property tour, stood near the remodeled kitchen area. He was happily sharing complex business strategies with a group of young, inspiring female entrepreneurs who had recently graduated with top honors from our rigorous financial literacy program. The energy flowing through the building was pure uplifting and incredibly supportive. I walked slowly through the crowded living room, savoring the distinct feeling of absolute safety within my own walls. The oppressive, suffocating atmosphere that Vivian and Keisha used to force upon this sacred space was completely eradicated. I was no longer the invisible, scapegoated daughter, desperately trying to earn a seat at a fundamentally broken table. I was the undisputed architect of my own magnificent universe. A gentle, reassuring hand rested softly on the lower curve of my back, smoothly pulling me from my quiet internal observation. I turned around to find Julian standing right beside me. He was the visionary commercial architect who had helped me painstakingly redesign the community center without compromising its vital historical integrity. He handed me a delicate crystal flute filled to the brim with vintage champagne, his dark eyes reflecting the dancing firelight. Julian was completely different from the fragile, insecure men I had encountered in the past. He never tried to subtly diminish my massive corporate success. He did not feel remotely threatened by my immense financial wealth, my sharp analytical mind, or my uncompromising boundaries. When he looked at me, he saw a true partner, a total equal, and a woman whose relentless ambition he deeply admired rather than feared. We stood shoulder to shoulder, silently absorbing the magnificent reality of the sprawling empire I had successfully built directly from the burning ashes of my family's deceitful betrayal. The local news channels occasionally provided brief, pathetic updates on the people who unfortunately shared my DNA. Brad was recently denied early parole, officially condemned to spend several more freezing winters inside a maximum security federal facility. Keisha and Vivian were still aggressively ringing up discounted merchandise at a miserable retail store, permanently trapped in the inescapable, crushing consequences of their own toxic greed. Darius was currently sweeping city streets to satisfy his strict probation requirements. They were nothing more than distant, irrelevant ghosts to me now. They were living, breathing cautionary tales demonstrating exactly what happens when blatant arrogance permanently eclipses basic family loyalty. I took a slow sip of my dry champagne and stepped gracefully away from the bustling crowd. I walked purposefully toward the grand stone fireplace dominating the eastern wall of the room. Resting securely on the center of the polished mahogany mantel was a beautiful, ornate, silver-framed photograph of Big Mama. Her fierce, loving eyes seemed to shine exceptionally bright in the warm firelight. She had built the original foundation of this physical property with deeply calloused hands and pure, unrelenting grit during a profoundly difficult era. I had successfully secured her precious legacy using complex data analytics, ruthless legal strategy, and absolutely unyielding personal boundaries. We had both fought monumental battles to keep this roof over our heads. Julian stepped up beside me and raised his glass toward the center of the room, loudly calling for everyone's attention. The festive holiday music faded softly into the background. The lively conversations paused as dozens of supportive faces turned respectfully in my direction. I turned to face my loyal corporate team, my true, unwavering friends, and the remarkable man who stood firmly by my side. I smiled, raising my sparkling glass of champagne high into the warm, joyful air. Family is not about the blood in your veins. It is about who respects you enough to never count you out and who knows exactly whose name is on the deed. I took a final victorious sip of champagne as the entire room erupted into a deafening cheer echoing brilliantly into the cold, starlit winter night.